Hello, my name is Edison Sergei Titus. I'm with the Titus Law Firm. We're based in Houston, Texas. All right, so should you create an LLC by yourself? That's a very good question. You see it everywhere. Everyone's talking about an LLC, Rocket Lawyer, and LegalZoom, and all this stuff, right? And it's not really a hard process to create an LLC. So should you get an attorney from an attorney? If you're by yourself, I can probably sleep at night and be just fine with you not having an attorney create your LLC. Now, that's a very unpopular opinion among attorneys, right? But there's only so much that you can screw up by yourself, right? If you're by yourself, go nuts. But that's not legal advice. That's just my opinion, right? Okay, but what if you're not by yourself? What if you're doing an LLC with your spouse or your family member or anybody else at all? One person or more plus you. If that's the scenario, then I highly suggest that you get yourself an attorney. Why is that? The first reason is because a lot of the laypersons, they seem to not know the importance of member managed and manager managed, right? And how you want to set that up actually matters. What you put on that paperwork and you file into the Texas Secretary of State, it matters. I'm not going to get into the weeds of that here. There's a lot to say about that, but even that's minor compared to the real meat and potatoes, which is exactly what we're going to be talking about with a little bit more detail. Let's see. The main thing about having an LLC is the operating agreement. The operating agreement will tell you what are the rules of engagement, if you will. Who has what role and who has what responsibility dealing with this LLC. That's the important part, right? So yes, we want to make sure that the filing is correct and it's member managed or manager managed the way that you intended it to be. All of that is great. But the real meat and potatoes is that operating agreement. And what the attorney is going to do for you is that they're going to ask the right questions and the hard questions that are forward looking so we can make sure that the operating agreement is covering everything that it needs to and alleviating future possible tensions because everything's fine when, you're all hot and ready to start a company together and get it going, right? Uh, but once things get a little bit of dicey and decision making seems to be at odds with one another and there's real money involved, $10, sure, man, go ahead. You can get me next time. $10 million, it's a whole different fight, right? So it it needs to be forward looking as if it were wildly successful and if everything just went flat wrong, right? To do this, we would ask the right questions. What are those questions that we're asking? We'd be asking stuff like the ownership. How's it going to be divided, right? Are you intending on taking new members later? Members in LLC speak is shareholders in corporations, right? Who's going to contribute what and how much? Is it sweat equity for me because I have a specialized skill set? And then for you, it's going to be money. And for somebody else, it's going to be something else or accommodation, right? Do we have to put something in the future? If the company requires extra money, are we all going to fork over the money that's needed pro rata based off of who owns what? Or is it going to be a set dollar amount, period, point blank, that each of us are putting in? Indemnification. Is anyone going to be indemnified from the actions of the company? And if so, in what circumstance? Obligation to personally guarantee. If the business needs money, are we all signing on the dotted line or is just one person signing on the dotted line? If it's just one person or all people, is that being taken into consideration with who gets what equity? Control. That goes to what I said at the beginning. This whole thing is all about rights, roles, and responsibilities. Do we all have the right to financials? Do we all have a right to access the bank account? Do we all have the role of being able to make tax decisions or contract the company? Responsibilities. Who has the responsibility of tax matters, right? Is it your responsibility or mine? And if we don't do it, is it coming down on your head or my head? Really, it's everyone's, but we need to have the operating agreement say how we're going to agree to operate. If we want to wind it up, how's that going to take place? How's that going to look? What if I want to wind it up, but you don't want to? New members. Are we going to take new members ever? If so, under what circumstances? Do they have to pay in at the rate that we bought in back then? At the value now? How are we going to value the company? Under what circumstances, why, and how are we going to let new members in? And then, of course, the ability to sell ownership shares. Is it going to be a right of first refusal? Do I get the right to purchase yours before you sell it to somebody else? Are you even allowed to sell it to somebody else? So it's these types of questions and more that matter. And then, of course, let's not forget, you could be married, right? If you're married, that ownership of the LLC, let's say that you own 30% of it, half of that belongs to your wife or husband, right? And so are they going to sign a waiver saying that's separate property of yours? If something happens, am I now having to fight you and your spouse? So all of these are things that need to be talked about on the front end. And attorneys are the ones who ferret out all these questions and get the answers, right? And even if you're like, oh, that would never happen, we still got to ask it. Now, if you decide at that time, you make the business judgment decision that this operating agreement doesn't need to speak to it, hey, we did our job. We brought it to your attention. But these are the types of things that you need a lawyer for. We got to ask the tough questions, be everybody's least favorite friend, and then we have to draft that to make sure that it's forward looking. All right. So let's see. In conclusion, making an LLC is way more than just filling out some form and sending it to the Secretary of State. Way more than that. It's about seeing beyond the curve, looking into the future, and making sure that we set this up on as stable a ground as possible to make sure that success is imminent. We ask the right questions, we draft the right paperwork, and we make sure that you can sleep easy knowing that everything was done correctly and everything that needed to be discussed was discussed. All right, so that's it. That was much shorter than I thought it would be. Do you need an LLC? Give us a call or some lawyer and make sure that lawyer is asking the right questions so your six is covered. All right, subscribe, follow. We're on all of the platforms with the exception of Snapchat. All right, see you next time.